He ran Goldman Sachs. He sat in the United States Senate. He was governor of New Jersey. By the time John Corzine took over a mid-size futures broker called MF Global in the spring of 2010, he had already held 3 of the most powerful jobs in American finance and government. And not many people bet against a resume like that. 20 months later, in 8 days flat, the whole thing came apart. MF Global filed for bankruptcy on October 31, 2011, the 8th largest corporate bankruptcy in American history at that point. Roughly $1.6 billion in customer money had gone missing. Some of it moved right out of accounts that were supposed to be untouchable by law. Under oath before Congress, Corzine said this: "I simply do not know where the money is." His own assistant treasurer, a woman named Edith O'Brien, sat in front of that same Congress a few months later and said nothing at all. She invoked her right to remain silent. Here is the part that surprises people. John Corzine was never charged with a crime, not one. 6 years later, in a quiet civil settlement, he agreed to pay $5 million out of his own pocket and never work in the futures industry again. No trial, no handcuffs, just a check and a permanent exit. This is cooked books. And this is the story of how a man who ran the government's money for a living lost track of everyone else's. John Corzine started as a bond trader. He joined Goldman Sachs in 1976, made partner in 1980, and by 1994, he was running the entire firm as senior partner, the man who took Goldman public. Wall Street remembers him as one of the sharpest bond minds of his generation, somebody who could read a spread better than almost anyone in the building. Then he did something almost nobody from that world does. He walked away from finance and ran for office. In 2000, he won a seat representing New Jersey in the United States Senate, and he served there until 2006. That same year, he became governor of the state, the 54th person to hold the job. For 4 years, he ran New Jersey's government, its budget, its politics. Then, in 2010, after losing a re-election bid, Corzine did something that raised eyebrows, even by Wall Street standards. He took the top job at a mid-tier futures brokerage most ordinary people had never heard of. MF Global handled trades for farmers hedging wheat prices and hedge funds trading currencies, a plumbing business, not a household name. Corzine wanted to change that. He wanted to turn MF Global into something bigger, something that looked a lot like the Goldman Sachs he used to run. MF Global did not start with Corzine. Its roots trace back to a British brokerage business called Man Financial, and one especially important year for that company was 2005, the year a rival futures broker named Refco collapsed in one of the biggest trading scandals of the decade. If that name sounds familiar, it should. Refco is Cooked Books Episode 11, and it is worth pausing here because these two firms get confused constantly. Refco's founder hid years of bad debt through a circular trick called round tripping, quietly bouncing the same money between related companies right up until the initial public offering. That was a hidden liability, built over years, then unloaded on new shareholders. MF Global's story is not that story. What happened here started with one enormous, very visible bet, made out in the open, that simply went wrong and dragged customer money down with it. Different disease, same family of hospital. What connects the two firms is a real business transaction. When Refco fell apart, Man Financial bought its customer accounts for $323 million, absorbing traders and clients from the wreckage of one scandal straight into the company that would become MF Global. 2 years later, in July 2007, MF Global went public on the New York Stock Exchange at $30 a share. It was a mid-size, mildly profitable futures broker. Nothing about it screamed disaster. Not yet. Corzine took the CEO chair in March 2010 with a clear plan. He wanted to rebuild MF Global in Goldman's image, turning a plain futures broker into something closer to an investment bank, trading the firm's own money for the firm's own profit. He found his opening in Europe. The Eurozone was drowning in debt, and bonds from Italy, Spain, Portugal, and Ireland were trading at a discount because investors were terrified those governments might default. Corzine bet they would not. He built a position using a structure called repo to maturity, essentially borrowing against the bonds and timing the repayment to land exactly on the day those bonds matured. On paper, it looked almost riskless. In practice, it meant MF Global's fate was tied to a notional $6.3 billion pile of European government debt. To fund a bet that size, the firm leveraged itself hard. Estimates vary depending on which balance sheet date you use, but by the middle of 2011, MF Global was carrying somewhere between 30 and 40 times its own capital in assets, an extremely thin cushion for a firm holding billions in sovereign debt during a continental debt crisis. Inside the building, at least one person raised a hand. MF Global's chief risk officer pushed back on the European trade, warning it was too large and too concentrated. Corzine's response was not to shrink the bet. He restructured the reporting lines so the risk officer answered to the chief operating officer instead of the board. The warning got buried instead of heard, and the trade kept growing. By October 2011, the walls were closing in. On October 24th, the ratings agency Moody's downgraded MF Global to Bar 3, the lowest rung still inside investment grade. The next day, the firm reported a quarterly loss of $191.6 million and the stock started falling apart in real time. Late on October 27th, Moody's cut the rating a second time. That downgrade pushed MF Global into junk territory at 2 of the 3 major ratings agencies, a threshold that triggers demands for collateral almost automatically. Banks and counterparties wanted more cash right now to keep doing business with a firm the market no longer trusted. The next morning, October 28th, was the last real trading day MF Global ever had. Customers and counterparties ran for the exits all at once, the way they always do once everyone senses the same thing. Inside the firm, staff scrambled to cover overdrafts and margin calls that kept multiplying by the hour. Edith O'Brien, the assistant treasurer, wired $175 million to a UK affiliate that day, trying to plug a hole that kept getting bigger. Nobody outside the building knew it yet, but the wall between the firm's own money and its customers' money, the wall the law required, had already started to crack. On October 30th, MF Global sent a message to its regulators, the CME Group and the CFTC, confirming the worst fear in the building. There was a material shortfall in customer segregated accounts of exactly $891,465,650. Customer accounts were frozen on the spot. That number would not stay put. Within days, as investigators added up shortfalls both inside the United States and overseas in the UK, the total climbed toward $1.6 billion in customer money that could not be accounted for. Keep that distinction straight, because the story gets it wrong constantly. The $891 million figure was the first official shortfall reported to regulators on October 30th. The $1.6 billion figure is the wider estimate that emerged days later once the overseas piece was added in. On October 31st, MF Global Holdings filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in a New York courtroom. On that same day, in a separate legal process with a separate court-appointed trustee, the regulated brokerage arm, MF Global Inc., was placed into liquidation under the Securities Investor Protection Law. 2 different companies, 2 different proceedings, 2 different trustees doing 2 different jobs. Moving customer money out of segregated accounts is not a gray area. It violates a specific CFTC rule that exists for exactly this reason: to keep a brokerage from ever touching client funds to plug its own holes. That single rule would sit at the center of everything that came next. On November 4th, 4 days after the bankruptcy filing, John Corzine resigned as chief executive of MF Global. He walked away from a severance package worth $12.1 million, and DAS did not take a dollar of it. In his resignation statement, he spoke of, quote, "great sadness about what has transpired at MF Global and the impact it has had on the firm's clients, employees, and many others." A month later, on December 8th, Corzine sat before the House Agriculture Committee and delivered the line that would define the entire case. "I simply do not know where the money is or why the accounts have not been reconciled to date." He said something close to it again before the Senate a few days later, apologizing but denying he had ever ordered anyone to touch customer funds. Then, in March 2012, an internal memo surfaced that complicated his story considerably. A colleague of Edith O'Brien's had written a note describing a large transfer of funds, and the note read, "Per JC's direct instructions, JC, John Corzine's initials." On March 28, 2012, O'Brien herself sat before Congress. Asked about roughly $200 million moved between accounts, she invoked her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and answered nothing. That silence was not an admission of guilt. It is a constitutional protection, and she was well within her rights to use it. But it left the room, and the country watching, with more questions than answers. By November 2012, a congressional staff report landed with a verdict of its own, describing what it called an authoritarian atmosphere Corzine created at the firm, where no one could challenge his decisions, and citing what it termed a dereliction of his duty. Here is where most stories like this one end with handcuffs. This one did not. The Department of Justice and the FBI investigated John Corzine for years. In the end, prosecutors decided not to bring criminal charges against him at all. Nobody connected to the collapse of MF Global went to prison. Nobody was indicted. The only case that stuck against Corzine came from a civil regulator, not a criminal court. In June 2013, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission filed a civil lawsuit against MF Global Inc., MF Global Holdings, John Corzine, and Edith O'Brien, accusing them of the unlawful use of nearly $1 billion of customer funds. Notice that number. Nearly $1 billion is the CFTC's later, narrower figure for money used unlawfully. It is a different number from a different filing than the earlier $1.6 billion shortfall estimate. Both are real. They measure different things. While the CFTC's case worked its way through the system, the people who mattered most, the actual customers of MF Global, were slowly getting their money back through the bankruptcy courts. By April 2014, the trustee overseeing MF Global Inc. had returned $6.7 billion to more than 26,000 customers, 100% of every claim on file. Canadian clients, protected by a law that banned the practice that sank everyone else, got their money back in 10 days flat. The case against John Corzine finally closed on January 5, 2017, more than 5 years after MF Global collapsed. A federal judge in New York, Victor Marrero, approved a consent order that settled the CFTC's civil charges once and for all. Corzine agreed to pay $5 million out of his own pocket, a personal penalty, and accepted a lifetime ban from ever working in the regulated futures industry again. The settlement included one specific, pointed condition. Corzine, in the words of the order itself, could not, quote, seek or accept, directly or indirectly, reimbursement or indemnification from any insurance policy. No corporate insurance safety net. No quiet reimbursement from a friendly board. This one had to come out of his own bank account. Edith O'Brien settled her own piece of the case the same day. She agreed to pay $500,000 and accepted an 18-month ban from the industry for what the CFTC called aiding and abetting the violations. MF Global Inc. and MF Global Holdings, the corporate entities themselves, had already paid a separate $100 million civil penalty back in 2013 when the CFTC first filed suit. Add it up, and you get a strange kind of arithmetic. A collapse built on a single shortfall report of $891 million, a missing customer money estimate that reached $1.6 billion at its widest, and in the end, $5.5 million in personal penalties split between the two people running the front office. Not one single day in prison for anyone. By the time the bankruptcy courts finished their work, the trustee had distributed $8.1 billion total, paying customers back in full and unsecured creditors 95 cents on the dollar. Measured purely in dollars recovered, MF Global's customers did better than the victims of almost any comparable collapse. That took years of litigation and does not erase the months they spent locked out of their own accounts. John Corzine did not disappear. In 2019, after clearing new regulatory hurdles, he launched a hedge fund called the JSC Opportunity Fund. The initials of his late son Jeffrey combined with his own. It never really took off. In September 2023, Corzine announced he was shutting it down and returning what capital remained to investors, reportedly because MF Global's shadow made it too hard to attract new money, more than a decade after the collapse. So here is the final shape of the story. A man who sat in the United States Senate, who governed a state, who ran Goldman Sachs itself, built the biggest bet of his career on European government debt, leveraged the firm somewhere between 30 and 40 times over, and watched it take $891 million of other people's money down with it in 8 days. He was never charged with a crime. He wrote a check for $5 million and walked away from the industry forever. The bankruptcy that ranked 8th largest in American history in 2011 closed its books, and the man at the top paid a fine. This has been Cooked Books. The archive is open.